Welcome to Lesson 1 of Genki 3rd edition. In this series, we are going to be covering all of Genki 1 before eventually moving on to Genki 2. So if you are a beginner learner of Japanese, you are in the right place because these very popular textbooks are designed to take you all the way from the elementary level up to the intermediate level, making you one step closer to achieving your dream of mastering Japanese and living in a high school anime, or whatever your Japanese dream is. Feel free to tell me down in the comments below. Here's a little overview of what we are going to be covering in this video in Lesson 1. The first being statement sentences, being able to say that something is something or simply that something is. In relation to this, we are also going to be looking at particles, which is a special Japanese category of words designed to help you understand the sentence better. And then we are going to be looking at nouns and how Japanese nouns might differ from nouns in some other languages. Then we're going to look at question sentences, teaching you how to ask a question in Japanese and how to use the question word for what, or nani, which you might be very familiar with if you watch anime. And then we're going to finish by looking at the no particle and how we can use that in a sentence to connect different nouns. So starting off by looking at this basic Japanese statement, X wa Y des, we are equipped with the tools to say something is something. You'll notice that above the hiragana, I have romaji for wa and des, and that's just so you can read it if you haven't mastered hiragana already, but make it a priority if you're just starting out studying Japanese to truly master hiragana as quickly as possible. I will include the romaji for the first 2 lessons in this series, just like it's done in the Genki textbook itself, but then from then on you will have to fend for yourself. Now, let's look at what this might look like in practice. So, watashi wa nokui desu means I am nokui. Watashi wa nokui desu. And you'll notice if you look above my name that I can't completely correctly transliterate it into Japanese, so nokui becomes nokui. And you can expect the same for your name once you get your Japanese name. If we break this down a little bit, we can see that the X marks the topic. No, the X is the topic, and then wa is the topic marker. And this is a particle which I will explain a little bit later. And then we have Y, which is something about X in this instance. And then we end it with des, which is stating that something is. So, watashi, I. Watashi means I. Watashi wa, speaking of I, me. Watashi wa nokui desu. So, I am nokui. And you can, of course, insert your own name there. So, for example, if your name is Paul, you can say, watashi wa Paulu desu, etc., etc. We can also shorten this even more because sentences that don't have an explicit subject are very common in Japanese because it's understood from context. So we can say something like Nihon desu if we are talking about Japan, Nihon meaning Japan. We don't say Japan desu, Nihon desu, or Nihonjin desu, which means a Japanese person. So if you want to find out which nationality you are in Japanese, you just take your country in Japanese. So let's say, for example, you are from America. You say America, and then you add jin. America jin desu, Nihon jin desu, and I would be Iceland jin desu. And then let's say we would be talking about some game, and it's understood from context. We can say Final Fantasy desu. Are you familiar with Final Fantasy? I hope you are, at least if you're studying Japanese. But if we have to add the subject, or if we want to add the subject because it's not understood from context, we can do it like this. So, watashi wa Iceland jin desu. Watashi, once again, meaning I. So, watashi wa, speaking of me, watashi wa Iceland jin desu. So, I am Icelandic. Or, Tanaka-san wa gakusei desu. So, Tanaka-san wa Tanaka-san, so speaking of Tanaka-san or Mr. Tanaka, he is a student. Gakusei, meaning student. Tanaka-san wa gakusei desu. Or スミスさんは留学生です。So スミスさんは留学生です means Mr. Smith is an foreign exchange student or exchange student, which might be in your future or maybe it's in your present. I don't know where you are. Don't ask me. I don't know you. But a little bit about particles. So if we look at the Japanese word for particles, it's joshi, which we could translate to help words. The first part of the kanji there is the kanji for taskeru. And if you watch anime once again, you might have heard something like tasukete, like help me, save me. So these words are there to explain how parts of a sentence are related to one another and how they're all working together. And wa is what is called, in this instance, a topic particle, speaking of something. So watashi wa, speaking of me. Tanaka-san wa, speaking of Tanaka-san. And if you have already studied some hiragana, you might be confused at this point because you know this letter not as wa, but as ha. But the thing is that this letter, when it is being used as a particle, is read as wa, not ha. And this might sound very confusing, but I promise you, you'll get used to it in no time. So don't worry about it. Just move on. But there are some exceptions, and if we look at the words for good day and good evening, here we have ha being used as wa, even though it's a bit different from the way we usually see it. And I have a little story about this because I was watching TikTok one day, and I saw someone teaching Japanese in a respected educational institution, and they had written konnichi wa with the hiragana for wa instead of ha. And that's the only TikTok comment I've ever made was correcting that, like some douchebag. Actually, it's spelled konnichiwa with a ha. And it's the same for konbanwa. And you can sort of think of it as speaking of today or speaking of this evening, because konnichi means this day and konban means this evening. But moving on to nouns, we can see that nouns in Japanese always stay the same. And this makes learning nouns very easy in Japanese compared to a lot of other languages. So there's no plural in Japanese. If you have a dog, inu, it's always inu. It never becomes inus or something like that. There are no articles. There's no a car or the car. It's just kuruma, kuruma. And there's no possessive. Sam doesn't become Sams. It's just Sam, Samu no. We'll get into no a little bit later in this lesson. And this also means that neko is always neko, no matter how many cats there are. Gakusei is always gakusei, no matter how many students there are. And kaisoku is always kaisoku, no matter how many pirate kings there are. But as we all know, there can only be one. Looking at the power of nouns a little bit and what you can be expected to be able to say after this lesson. Here it is. So you can say something like, watashi wa neko desu, I am a cat. Or you can simply say neko desu if it's understood from context that you're talking about yourself. You cannot say kawaii neko desu, which means cute cat, or you are a cute cat depending on the context and your hobbies. Because we haven't learned adjectives yet. And you cannot say kawaii neko o kerimashita, I kicked a cute cat. And in all honesty, you probably shouldn't say something like that, at least not in earnest. Moving on to question sentences. It's very simple. To ask a question in polite Japanese, just end the sentence with ka. But there's a little bit of a catch now, because what is polite Japanese? Well, polite Japanese is what we are learning at the moment. We start with what we can call mass form, and that before moving on to more sort of casual Japanese, which you might use with your friends. So that's something to be aware of. But how does this work in practice? So If we want to say I am a student or someone is a student, we can say gakusei desu, gakusei desu. But if you want to ask if someone is a student, you can just say gakusei desu ka, gakusei desu ka, and so end the sentence with ka. And you'll also notice that it's not customary to use a question mark in Japanese. So even though the sentence is a question, we don't have a question mark at the end. It just ended with the little circle dot. And here's a word that is probably familiar to many of you. Nani? 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 So what? But even though you maybe heard this word a lot of times in anime or some other form of Japanese media, it's a little bit more complicated than that, even though it's not that complicated. The fact is that nani often becomes nan when it's combined with other things. So for example, if we want to combine it with what we've learned, desu ka, asking about like gakusei desu ka, we have to say nan desu ka. We don't say nani desu ka, so it's nan desu ka, nan desu ka. And if you want to ask what time it is, we combine it with ji for time. So nanji desu ka, nanji desu ka. Or if you want to ask how old, we say nansai desu ka, nansai desu ka. And what year are you in school? Nan nensei desu ka? So if you are a first year student, you say ichi nensei desu, etc., etc. So here are some examples. You might be asked, nansai desu ka? Nansai desu ka? And you can answer, watashi wa 19 sai desu, if you are a 19-year-old girl, or a boy, or whatever. You can also skip watashi wa and just say 19 sai desu, 19 sai desu, or whatever age you are. And a part of lesson 1 is actually learning the numbers, which I won't cover here, but you can work out your own age using the book. And then we have another question, ima nanji desu ka? So what time is it now? And we can say, ima 12 ji han desu. So it's 12:30. And just like with watashi, we can skip ima, which means now. So ima 12 ji han desu, or just simply 12 ji han desu. Moving on to the last grammar point. We take a look at how to qualify nouns with no, how to make no explain something more about the nouns we are using. So the formula is noun, no, noun. So you have no in the middle of two nouns, where the first noun presents the added information, and the main noun, the main thing, is the second noun. For example, アメリカの大学, so an American university. Here the university is the main thing, so 大学, and America is the thing that is qualifying it. So アメリカの大学, we can think of it as a University of America. And here we have some words that are not in the chapter. 今日の授業. So 今日 means today, and 授業 means class. So the class of today. And we can also take a look at something like this. 鋼の錬金術師. So here we have steel, 鋼, and 錬金術師, which means alchemist. So what might this be? The alchemist of steel. Yes, it's Full Metal Alchemist. Steel and an alchemist combined. And another use of the no is possessive. So watashi no tomodachi. Tomodachi means friend, and watashi once again means I. So my friend, watashi no tomodachi. And if your friend has a bag or something, you can say tomodachi no kaban. So my friend's bag. And watashi no kyokasho. So my textbook. Watashi no kuchi, my mouth. Watashi no mimi, etc., etc. You can also use this to make very long sentences. For example, Watanabe-san no otou-san wa daigaku no sensei desu. And here, the combined noun with no sort of acts as a single noun. So, 渡辺さんのお父さん。So, Watanabe's father は、speaking of Watanabe's father or Mr. Watanabe's father, 大学の先生です。He is a 大学の先生。He is a university teacher. So, 渡辺さんのお父さんは大学の先生です。So, that's it for the grammar points and the actual lesson. But keep in mind that if you're just starting out studying Japanese, make mastering hiragana a priority. It will make everything a lot more simple. I recommend that you memorize vocabulary. I recommend that you memorize vocabulary by writing it down in hiragana. This way you can activate more memory centers if I allow myself to act like I know anything about science. But it is my personal experience that it's not just about saying the word, hearing the word, reading the word, but you can also benefit from writing the word. And this way you can do two things at once. You can practice your hiragana while also practicing your vocabulary. A lot of people might say that in this day and age you don't need to practice writing to study Japanese because you can just write it on your phone or in your computer. And that's completely true. But I think that it is a part of the culture. It is a part of Japanese culture to learn how to write. And it will add something to your experience. So I highly recommend at least giving it a go. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Japanese language and culture. But until next time, I'll see you in lesson 2. Mata ne!